Not a long argument, not a series of incidents building toward a breaking point. Just 5 words, said in a moment of irritation or arrogance, in front of the wrong people at the wrong time, and a marriage that had lasted 15 years was suddenly visible for exactly what it had been all along. Before we get into what happened on that stage, hit the like button and subscribe right now. Because this story is not simply about a man saying something unforgivable. It is about what happens immediately afterward, about a woman who does not collapse, does not retaliate, and does not look to anyone else for permission to know her own worth, and about a host who has spent more than a decade watching families reveal themselves under pressure, who finally heard something so raw and so wrong that he set down his microphone and said exactly what needed to be said. Steve Harvey has confronted many things on the Family Feud stage. He has redirected, reframed, and gently corrected. But on an autumn afternoon in 2023, he did something different. He confronted a man directly, without softening, without the cushion of humor, and with the full moral clarity of someone who had watched something genuinely harmful happen in front of him and had decided that the audience, the camera, and the man himself all needed to hear the same thing at the same time. What that confrontation produced, and what the woman at the center of it did with it, is the reason this story has been watched more than 15 million times and counting. ACT 20. CHERC 45 seconds 4 minutes. Diane Ellison was 46 years old, and she had spent the last 15 of them being more than enough. She had grown up in Jackson, Mississippi, the eldest of 3 children raised by her mother, Ruth, after her father had left when Diane was 9. Ruth Ellison had worked as a hospital administrator for 32 years and had raised her children on a combination of rigorous expectation and unconditional warmth that Diane had carried with her into every room of her adult life. The expectation was that you prepared, you showed up, and you did not allow other people's assessments of your value to substitute for your own. The warmth was that this was delivered not as pressure, but as belief. Ruth had always acted, with complete consistency, as though her children were capable of whatever they set their minds to, and that belief had accumulated in Diane like a slow, permanent kind of confidence. She had studied nursing at the University of Mississippi, graduated in the top quarter of her class, and built a 20-year career as a registered nurse in a level 2 trauma center in Birmingham, Alabama, a job that required her to make accurate, high-stakes decisions at speed, maintain composure under conditions that would destabilize most people, and provide care to individuals in the worst moments of their lives without losing the humanity that made the care meaningful. She was, by the account of every colleague who had worked alongside her, exceptional at it. She had met her husband, Preston Ellison, at a fundraising event in Birmingham in 2008, when she was 31 and he was 34. Preston was a financial advisor at a regional wealth management firm, well-dressed, well-spoken, and possessed of the smooth, unhesitating confidence of a man who had been told from an early age that he was destined for significant things. He was charming in those early years in a way that Diane had experienced as genuine, because the attention he brought to her in the beginning of their relationship had felt, for the first time in her life, like being recognized by someone who moved in the world with authority. She understood later that what she had experienced was not recognition but selection. The specific, flattering attention of a man who had chosen her and wanted her to understand that being chosen by him was itself a form of elevation. This distinction had taken years to articulate and longer still to act on. In the meantime, she had married him, raised their 2 children, Cassidy, now 14, and Devon, now 11, and continued her career in the trauma center while Preston advanced through his firm and gradually, with the confidence of a man who considers his own trajectory the natural measure of all things, began to hold Diane's life up against his own and find it wanting. The comments had not always been explicit. For most of their marriage they had been structural, embedded in the way Preston described Diane's work to colleagues at dinner parties. She's in nursing, very admirable, very hands-on. In the way he framed her salary relative to his own, would do fine, but it's mainly my income that carries things. In the way he spoke about her career choices to their children, as though they reflected a ceiling rather than a calling. Diane had heard all of it, and had responded to all of it in the way she responded to most difficult things, with the measured, precise calm of a trauma nurse who has learned that clear-headedness in a crisis is not the absence of feeling, but the most useful management of it. The explicit comment, the 5 words, had come 3 months before the taping, during an argument that Diane had initiated about the way Preston spoke to her in front of their children. She had presented her case clearly and without theatrics. Preston, cornered in a way he found unfamiliar, had said, "Let's be honest, Diane, you're not good enough for me." He had not shouted it. He had said it with the flat, conversational certainty of a man who believed it was simply true, as though it were a matter of record rather than a cruelty, as though stating it plainly was the same as being honest. Diane had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had said, "I see," and she had left the room, and she had not addressed it again, and she had begun, from that evening, to make a series of decisions about her life that she carried quietly and completely into the weeks that followed. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged by her sister, Kezia, who was 42 and who had applied the previous spring as a surprise for their mother Ruth's upcoming birthday. Diane had agreed to participate before the argument with Preston, and she had decided, after it, to continue, not with any specific plan, but with the readiness of a woman who had been clear about something for 3 months and had learned, across 20 years in a trauma center, that clarity is most useful when it arrives at the right moment rather than being forced before one. Preston had agreed to come. He had expressed no reservations. He had packed a blazer he considered appropriate for television. ACT 3E. THE STUGLE for 12 minutes, the Ellison family arrived at the Family Feud studio alongside the Nagian family from Houston, 4 siblings close in age and clearly accustomed to operating as a unit, who had the easy competitive fluency of people who had been playing games together for decades. The 2 families greeted each other warmly in the green room, and the Ellisons settled into the pre-show environment with the composed, pleasant manner of a family that presents well in social situations, which, Diane reflected in a brief, private moment of observation, was something they had always been good at. Ruth Ellison, who was 71 and had driven from Jackson for the occasion, sat beside Diane in the green room and held her hand without commenting on the fact that she was holding it. Ruth had known, from the evening Diane had called her 3 months earlier, that something had shifted. She had not asked for details. She had simply adjusted her behavior in the small, practical ways that a mother adjusts when she understands that her child is in the process of making an important decision and does not need advice, only presence. The first 3 rounds went smoothly for the Ellisons. Kezia was sharp on the buzzer. Devon, at 11, was the studio's immediate favorite, quick, earnest, and entirely unself-conscious, with the particular charm of a child who has not yet learned that being watched changes how you behave. Ruth landed a top 3 answer in the second round that produced a reaction from Steve Harvey so genuinely delighted that the audience laughed for a full 15 seconds. Diane played twice, accurately both times, and received her share of the audience's appreciation with a warmth that was entirely real. Preston played well, as Diane had expected. He was the kind of man for whom public performance came naturally. He had the polish of someone accustomed to client meetings and formal presentations, and he deployed it comfortably on the game show stage. The audience liked him. He accepted their approval with the ease of a man who expected it. Between the 3rd and 4th rounds, Steve brought the family together at center stage for the conversational interlude. He moved through the Ellisons with his characteristic warmth, drawing out Ruth's story, the 32 years as a hospital administrator, the 3 children raised alone, with a genuine appreciation that had the audience fully attentive. He asked Devon what he wanted to be when he grew up, and Devon said a doctor, and Steve asked if that was because of his mother, and Devon said yes without any hesitation whatsoever, and the audience responded with a warmth that was entirely unrehearsed. Then Steve turned to Preston. He asked, with the light tone he used for such questions, how it felt to be surrounded by so many accomplished women. Preston smiled, the easy managed smile of a man arranging his answer. "It is something," he said. "You know, Diane does what she does, which is great. It's very noble work. But I think in our house, I am the one who has really built something. She would tell you the same thing." He looked at Diane, inviting her confirmation with the confidence of someone who has never had reason to expect it will not arrive. The studio went quiet, not the polite quiet of a question waiting for a follow-up. The hard, specific quiet of a room that has heard something that cannot be unheard. The silence of 200 people registering, simultaneously, the shape of what they had just been shown. Diane did not look at Preston. She did not look at the audience. She looked at a point slightly above the middle distance, with the expression of a woman who has heard this before and who had decided, at some point before she walked into this building, exactly what she would do the next time she heard it in front of people. Devon, who was 11 years old and had just told 200 strangers that he wanted to be a doctor because of his mother, looked at his father with an expression that no parent who saw it would forget. Ruth Ellison, who had raised 3 children alone for 32 years and who knew the shape of diminishment when she encountered it, straightened in her chair. Steve Harvey was no longer wearing his hosting expression. He was wearing the expression of a man who has just classified something correctly and is deciding how to respond to the classification. He looked at Preston for a long moment. Then he looked at Diane. "Diane," he said. "Does he say things like that at home?" Diane looked at Steve. Her voice, when she answered, was completely level, the voice of a trauma nurse delivering a clinical assessment. "He told me 3 months ago that I am not good enough for him," she said. In those words, yes, the studio stopped. A CT4T2RNU in 12-16 minutes, Steve Harvey set his cue cards down on the podium. He did not signal to the production team. He did not call for a pause. He stood where he was and looked at Preston Ellison with the kind of attention that leaves no ambiguity about what is coming next. "I need you to hear something," Steve said. His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. It had the particular, carrying quality of absolute certainty. The voice of a man who has decided that what he is about to say is not negotiable and does not require volume to establish that fact. Preston opened his mouth. Steve continued without pausing. "This woman," Steve said, "has spent 20 years walking into a trauma center and saving people's lives, not advising them, not managing their portfolios, standing over them in the worst moment of their existence and making sure they come through it. She has raised your children while doing that. She has built a life alongside you while doing that. And you told her, in those words, in your own home, that she is not good enough for you." He paused. The pause was deliberate and complete, the kind that ensures a sentence has finished landing before the next one begins. "I want you to look at your son," Steve said. Preston looked at Devon. Devon was looking back at his father with the open, unguarded face of a child waiting, the face of someone who has not yet learned to manage what he is feeling, and therefore is not managing it. "That boy just told this room that he wants to be a doctor because of his mother," Steve said. "Not because of a salary comparison, because of who she is and what she does and what she has shown him is possible, and you sat here and told this room, told him, that she has not built anything." He let that land. "What exactly has she not built, sir?" The silence that followed was of a kind that the studio had not produced before, not the silence of an awkward moment or an uncomfortable pause, the silence of a verdict being delivered in a room with no appeal process. Preston said nothing. He had the expression of a man who had arrived at a position from which his usual instruments, confidence, polish, the ability to reframe things in his favor, were completely unavailable to him. He looked diminished in the specific way that a person looks diminished when they have been seen clearly and know it. Steve turned to Diane. The shift in his manner was immediate and total, from confrontation to something gentler and more direct, the transition of a man who has finished one necessary thing and is beginning another. "Diane, I have one thing to say to you, and I need you to hear it in this room, in front of these people, so it cannot be taken back or reclassified or explained away." He walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away and spoke directly to her, without theatrics, without performance. "You are more than good enough. You were always more than good enough. The problem has never been your worth. The problem has been someone telling you that his measure of it was the one that counted. It was not. It is not, and I think somewhere in you, you have always known that. Diane looked at him steadily. Her eyes were bright, but she did not cry. The composure of a woman who has learned, through years of professional necessity, to feel things fully without being undone by them. She nodded once. I know, she said quietly. I have known for a while. The audience rose. The applause was long and sustained and entirely genuine. The sound of 200 people responding not to a dramatic moment, but to a true one. Ruth Ellison, who was 71 years old and had driven from Jackson and had held her daughter's hand in the green room without being asked, stood and applauded with her hands raised. The specific, full, body gesture of a mother who has waited a long time to see her child properly seen. Devon put his arms around his mother from the side. Cassidy, who had been standing very still throughout everything that had just occurred, took her mother's hand. Preston stood apart. He did not attempt to speak. For once, there was nothing to say that would serve him, and some part of him, the part that Steve Harvey had reached in the only way it could be reached, understood that. Steve Harvey looked out at the room. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what 20 years of showing up looks like. This is what it looks like when someone does the work. The real work, the work that does not appear on a performance review, and does it every single day without asking for an accounting. The accounting just happened, and the result is exactly what it should be. ACT 50T LACY 50s 20 thus minutes." The Ellison episode aired 8 weeks after the taping. Within 48 hours, the clip of Steve's confrontation had been viewed 15 million times. Within a week, it had been shared in 42 countries and translated into 14 languages. It was covered by news outlets, healthcare professional networks, financial industry publications, and relationship researchers, a range that reflected the multiple dimensions of what had happened on that stage. The healthcare response was particularly notable. Nursing associations and trauma medicine networks shared the clip as part of broader conversations about how healthcare professionals, and in particular, women in healthcare, are valued relative to higher, earning partners in mixed-income households. Several nursing publications ran extended commentary on the specific dynamic Preston had demonstrated, the framing of care work as admirable but secondary, the casual, conversational erasure of a career's significance through the language of comparison. One editorial widely shared noted that the sentence, "She does what she does, which is great, it's very noble," was a construction that nurses and teachers and social workers across the country had heard more times than they could count, and that hearing it named and confronted on a national television stage had produced in many of their readers something between relief and recognition. "I have been a trauma nurse for 18 years. One reader wrote to that publication, "My husband has told people at dinner parties, in front of me, that I am in nursing because I could not handle the pressure of medical school. I have never corrected him in public because I did not want to make a scene. I watched Steve Harvey make the scene for Diane, and I sat in my kitchen and I cried for 20 minutes. Then I called my husband and I told him what I had watched and what I needed him to understand. We had a conversation that we should have had 12 years ago. I am grateful to a game show for making it possible." Diane Ellison gave one interview, conducted 4 months after the episode aired, for a nursing professional journal that had reached out through the show's production team. She was composed and precise throughout, the same qualities that had been visible on the stage, and she spoke about the experience with a clarity that suggested she had not needed the afternoon to tell her what she already knew, but that it had provided something she had not anticipated, external confirmation at a scale that made internal dismissal impossible. She said that she had not gone onto that stage intending to say what she said. She had gone intending to be present for her mother's birthday celebration and to play a game. When Preston said what he said, she had responded honestly to Steve's direct question because she had decided, 3 months earlier, that she was finished protecting Preston from the consequences of his own words. She said, "I spent 15 years absorbing things that I would have intervened to stop if a colleague had said them to a patient. At some point the professional standard and the personal standard have to align. They aligned that afternoon. She said that Devon had asked her, the evening after the taping, whether she was going to leave his father. She said she had told him that she was going to make the best decision for the family, and that the best decision always started with honesty rather than with fear. She said he had nodded and gone to do his homework, and that this had told her something important about who her son was becoming. She confirmed, in the closing paragraphs of the interview, that she had filed for divorce 6 weeks after the taping. She said the decision had not been made on the stage. It had been made 3 months earlier, in the moment after Preston had said his 5 words, and she had said "I see," and left the room. The stage had simply been the first time the decision had been made visible to anyone other than herself. She said she had no regrets about the visibility. She said that some decisions benefit from being witnessed. Preston Ellison made no public statement. He engaged a legal representative and the divorce was handled through counsel on both sides. Those close to the family reported that he had made several attempts to reopen a personal conversation with Diane in the weeks following the episode's airing, and that she had responded to each through her attorney. Ruth Ellison, when asked by a reporter who reached her briefly outside her home in Jackson, said 2 sentences, "My daughter has always been more than good enough. I just needed someone with a bigger room to say it." She went inside and did not comment further. Steve Harvey addressed the episode in an extended interview conducted several months later for a podcast focused on masculinity, accountability, and public leadership. He said that the decision to confront Preston directly, rather than to redirect, deflect, or soften, had been immediate and instinctive, and that he had not waited before acting on it. "There are moments," he said, "where the host has to stop and the man has to start. And this was one of them. When Diane told me what he had said to her in their own home, in those words, clearly, without drama, I understood that this was not a moment for managing. It was a moment for responding. A man told his wife she was not good enough for him. In their house, where their children live, that is not a marital nuance. That is a thing that needed to be named for what it is, in front of people, so it could not be walked back." He paused. "I have no regrets about that conversation. What I will say is that it was not about him. It was about her. Everything I said to him, I said so that she could hear it said in a room full of witnesses. Because that matters. When you have been told something damaging in private, having the opposite said in public is not a small thing. It changes the record." The phrase "it changes the record" was quoted widely in the coverage that followed the interview. It became, for many viewers and readers who had followed the episode, a precise articulation of what the afternoon had actually accomplished. Not a resolution of the marriage, not a transformation of Preston, but a correction of the record. A public witnessed, irrevocable statement that what Diane Ellison had been told about her own worth was wrong, and that the room knew it, and that the room had said so. Diane Ellison had walked into the Family Feud studio as a trauma nurse of 20 years, a mother of 2, and a woman who had been told 3 months earlier that she was not good enough for the man she had married. She walked out as all of those things still, but with the record corrected, in the largest room available to her, by a man who had understood immediately what the correction required and had not hesitated to provide it. She had always known her worth. She had said so herself, quietly and without performance, in front of 200 people and 15 million more. The knowing had always been there. It had simply, for 15 years, been required to exist alongside a voice that told her otherwise. That voice no longer had the stage, and on a Tuesday evening in autumn 2023, the record was set straight. If Diane's story stayed with you, if it reminded you that no one else's measure of your worth is the one that counts, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do so now. These are the stories that change the record. We will keep telling them for as long as you are here.